welcome back to another episode of Rapping with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon, and I'm honored this episode to welcome David Spackman, General Counsel of Lahey Health.
Thank you, Ken. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Welcome to our show. There are a number of important issues that we're facing with regard to and involving Lahey Health currently. One is some good news. We recently passed a Substance Abuse Act that's going to help reduce the waiting time for some patients that are at the emergency room at Lahey. And we're going to also talk about some very important issues that's currently before the Superior Court in Massachusetts that David Spackman, Attorney Spackman, is spearheading an effort to stand up for our community in addressing our healthcare needs and our efficiency. First, let's talk about the Substance Abuse Act. I was really delighted to see that. Last May, we had a visit from the Speaker of the House, Bob DeLeo, to Lahey Health, and what we showed him and what he saw was a backlog of people, a bottleneck of people, and it was created by a number of people who had a need for substance abuse treatment. Lahey isn't equipped to handle that.
Absolutely. In fact, it was amazing when you were there with the speaker. None of us knew we were going to give you a tour of the emergency room. It wasn't planned. The visit had been set up weeks before, but you arrived there at what is sadly a typical time when we had two, I believe, substance abuse patients there because it's very difficult to get placements for them. Under the then current law, one is not paid for any services that one renders. And you and the speaker and others got to see firsthand how with each one of those patients, we had to have an armed guard who had to be pulled from elsewhere to stand guard. As we'll talk about later, our emergency room is not as big as it should be and gets overcrowded at times. And the impact it has on our ability to provide care for those who truly should be there for our treatment and admission to the hospital is significant, and you folks witnessed it firsthand. And we at Lahey, and I think the citizens of the Commonwealth, have to be incredibly grateful that you and others in the legislature passed this law, which will ease that burden, allow us to find placements, allow us to be paid for those services that we can render, and I think will have a very significant impact on backup times and the loads on emergency rooms throughout the Commonwealth. It doesn't solve all of our problems in that arena. It is just for substance abuse, although generally substance abuse is most difficult to handle in an emergency room situation just because they tend to be violent. I mean, remembering it is an illness and it's unpredictable. But the mental health issues that we're also tackling and that you folks will tackle in the next legislative session, we need to clearly bring mental health in its entirety, which includes substance abuse, into the mainstream of our treatment systems. We need to bring it into our primary care physician offices. We need to bring it into our clinics so it's not episodic and so it doesn't overload emergency rooms.
Right.
So we're incredibly grateful. It's a huge difference.
Thank you. And to unpack it a little bit,
sure.
The issue is that when people are brought in with a substance abuse problem, oftentimes it's prescription medication. It's illegal, but they're addicted to a substance. They come in for treatment. Lahey is not equipped to provide that type of treatment, is not paid to provide that type of treatment, but the patient is not just released. What Lahey does is Lahey identifies a treating facility, such as a mental health facility, and at that point waits for the insurance company to make a decision as to whether it will agree to pay for that treatment at that facility, even though there's a bed at that facility waiting for the person, even though the person is at Lahey, like you say, with an armed guard watching that person, sometimes in the hallway. And that
Often in the hallway.
Often in the hallway, and often it goes on for days.
Yes.
That person is there for 2-3 days, not being treated, so it's not good for the patient, taking up space that a person who needs the type of care that Lahey can provide, so it's not good for that person. They're waiting to be treated. Lahey's not being paid. Again, it's a problem for Lahey. It's a problem all around. So what this new law does is it says once the physician at Lahey confirms that this is a person who can benefit from treatment at a mental health facility for a substance abuse problem, that person is automatically eligible for up to 14 days of coverage. So Lahey can then take that person, transport that person to the proper facility to get treatment, and then open up the room at Lahey for a person that can benefit from the type of treatment that Lahey can provide.
Precisely, stated absolutely eloquently. What it does is it basically allows Lahey in the emergency room to operate almost as a triage function. We come in, the patient comes in, we identify the problem, which we can identify very quickly. And instead of sitting in the hall without payment for a long period of time, taking up space, we can now move them quickly into an available bed in a treatment facility. Small change in the law, huge change in results.
What pleased me greatly was that the Speaker of the House, Bob DeLeo, announced to the membership, he said, I went to Burlington, I saw this. It was a month later that this provision came out.
Yep.
And so I appreciate the fact that Lahey made that opportunity available for me and for the Speaker to come out and see firsthand, because it does wonders. You know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words.
It absolutely
well,
is,
here was
Ken.
a lifetime experience, I mean, a real life experience that was worth very important 1,000 words, because they came in the form of a bill that was signed by the governor earlier this month. And now people will get that help, and those of us that are, in a sense, behind the line of those people will get the help that we need too.
We can.
Everyone benefits.
Everyone benefits. The citizens of Burlington, the folks who use our emergency room, benefit immediately.
And now it's time for us to get to work and extend that benefit to other mental health issues, because it's the right idea, and we can see it work. And once we see it work, we can see that it should be applied to other mental health conditions as well.
Absolutely.
There's another very important issue that you've
Yes.
taken the lead on, and I appreciate what you've done, and that's the issue of the expansion of the Partners Healthcare Network. Currently, Partners has a desire to acquire South Shore Hospital, we've read about in the newspaper, and as a result of that expansion has had conversations and really an arrangement with the Attorney General, because the expansion would require some approvals. And what's being considered is an arrangement where Partners is told, okay, you can expand just so far, and here are the potential targets that will allow you to negotiate with, but that would be it. The problem is, among those potential targets are Hallmark and potentially Emerson Hospital here in Concord, and that would have a ripple effect on the consumers of healthcare, which is all of us, throughout this district and throughout this area. You've taken the lead. The Attorney General has filed suit because they need a court approval in order to do this.
Correct.
And you've taken the lead by filing a motion asking the judge, hold on, wait a minute. We've got to file what we call amicus briefs, which are friend of the court briefs, which are briefs that come in from parties that say, we're affected by this too, and you need to know what's going to happen next if this happens. There's a network of other healthcare facilities, along with Lahey. Some have been upfront about their participation with you, and some quietly because it's such a big issue. What impresses me is that you're all competitors. You've all gotten together to say, this is not good for the consumers in Massachusetts, and not good for us. It's going to create a de facto monopoly. I've talked long enough about introducing the topic, so why don't you take it, being the expert on
Well,
this.
it's in some ways it's a complex question, in some ways it's actually fairly simple. If we go back to 1994, when the Brigham and Mass General, both absolutely fine institutions, came together as a single entity. And they came together under Partners Healthcare, frankly, because they were tired of the insurance companies playing them off against each other. If the Brigham raised its price a little too high, they would say, well, we'll just move the business over to MGH. And so by coming together, they were able to say to the insurance companies, take it or leave it. This is the price. And they've stated that publicly on many occasions, that once they came together, they were able to name their price, and the insurance companies would have to pay it. So Blue Cross and Tufts and Harvard Pilgrim. That got no scrutiny. There was very little discussion. It happened, and over the years, Partners got bigger and bigger and bigger, acquired more hospitals, and they always had the ability to say, this is the price, this is what you will pay. And that price was always 20% or so higher than everybody else's. So if you think about it this way, I always use the analogy, if there's $1 for each one of us in the Commonwealth, and Partners gets $1.20 for somebody, then somebody else has got to get 80 cents. Right. And so year after year after year, the partners hospitals had this premium advantage that they acquired, and this was absolutely documented by the Attorney General, that price advantage was not related to quality, was not related to access, was not related to research, was not related to Medicare or Medicaid. It was related simply to the fact that they were big enough and large enough that they could extract a higher price. That is classic antitrust violation.
Right.
That's what built all those mansions in Rhode Island, the robber barons. And essentially, that was the situation that the Attorney General confronted over the last 4 or 5 years, that resulted in numerous cost driver reports that talked about the partners' impact. And again, we're not suggesting that partners hospitals are not superb hospitals.
Right.
They are.
Right.
In fact, we have superb care in Massachusetts virtually wherever you go. But their care was not significantly better or higher quality to justify the price differential. And we all pay for it. You pay for it if you go to Lahey. You pay for it if you go to Worcester, if you go to Bay State, because that's the nature of insurance. Insurance spreads the cost. And so if consumer A goes to an expensive partners hospital for a certain procedure and consumer B goes to a less expensive hospital, consumer B's premium payments are subsidizing consumer A.
Right, because the insurance company is the same insurance company
It's the
that's
same
covering
insurance
patients
company.
in both places.
So the high prices of the partners hospitals, that again has been documented by the Attorney General and others as not being related to quality or efficiencies, certainly, impacts all of us. That's sort of the background you have to think about when the Attorney General when Partners announced that it wanted to acquire South Shore, which is not a distressed hospital, is a very wealthy hospital, is in a very wealthy area, has very high prices. When they announced that they were going to acquire South Shore, that resulted in a joint federal and state investigation of whether this acquisition should go through. That happens under our antitrust laws. There was about a 3-year investigation, and the result of it was that the Attorney General announced a proposed settlement, which, as you state, had to go to court to get a consent decree, because then it's enforceable by the court. And instead of what is a typical remedy where a monopolistic organization seeks to acquire more facilities, they at the same time say, well, okay, you can acquire that one, but you may have to divest this one. They're what they call structural remedies. You've got to change the structure of the organization. Instead, we ended up with a proposed agreement that allowed what is already 3 times as an organization that is 3 times as large as any other. The coalition members together don't equal the size of partners.
The coalition members being those...
Lahey Health System, BI Deaconess Medical Center, Tufts Medical Center, and Atrius Health.
And these are the coalitions of healthcare providers getting together
right.
to address
question
this matter
this issue
to the court, saying we need time to do it, which you were successful getting so far. And now with that time, the opportunity to file these briefs and explain why this is not a resolution that's particularly helpful, that's in fact harmful to many of the residents of our district.
And you're exactly right. There really were 2 purposes there. The first one is the nature of the agreement is so broad, it basically adds 3, possibly 4 more hospitals to an already huge system, and it really sets the marketplace for the next 10 to 20 years. And it was done with no discussion, no public input, no involvement of the legislature, no involvement of the Health Policy Commission, which was created just to look at these issues. And when it looked at the South Shore Hospital acquisition, said this is going to raise prices, this is going to raise costs. So it was done with no public debate and no public input. So that was our first concern, that there simply had been no public knowledge or debate about a very, very significant issue that was going to have cost impacts on all of us. And the second issue was the substance, that basically the provisions of the agreement, in our view, are unworkable, incredibly complex, Those 4 institutions have had their CFOs, COOs, managed care contractors, the folks who negotiate our deals, going through that agreement. We don't agree what some of the provisions mean. It's a very complex agreement that the court's going to have to be involved in enforcing and interpreting. The next Attorney General is going to have to be involved in interpreting. So it's incredibly complex. It had no public debate, and we felt we needed to say stop. Yes. We need some public conversation about this, and here are the areas that we have problems with. And those areas are the fulcrum, the basis of the agreement, proposed agreement, is what they call component contracting, which means that you can add, yes, these 3-4 hospitals, but if an insurance company wants to negotiate with a price just with the community hospital and carve Mass General and the Brigham out of it, they can do so. You can't say no. That's called component contracting. It has never worked in the entire history of the United States. That concept of component contracting was tried in one case, and the insurance companies never used it. The insurance companies here will never use it. All those components, let's remember, they report to the same person.
Right.
They involve the same folks in the team. So it's never going to happen for a whole variety of reasons. So 1/3 of the, of the agreement is component contracting. Won't work, never has, never will.
So that I understand,
Sure.
component contracting would be that if a community hospital owned by a network, would there be 2 cost mechanisms involved?
Assuming if it worked, you could be Blue Cross and you could go to partners and say, I want 4 contracts. I don't want just a single contract. I want a contract with Hallmark. I want a contract with South Shore. I want a contract with MGH and the Brigham, and I want a contract with, pick another hospital.
Right.
And you have to negotiate those prices separately. And because the concept is, if you've come together as a single entity,
Right.
and you can say, it's all of us or none of us. Now they'd have to say, okay, you can have part of us. And presumably that would mean, or what the AJ would hope, is that means you'd be able to negotiate lesser prices because they can't use the entire width and breadth of their organization to force a higher price. In concept, it sounds good, but it's been entirely rejected by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, by the Justice Department, the 2 federal agencies who enforce the antitrust laws on a federal level. They've rejected them as because they don't work,
Right.
and the only time it was tried, the insurance companies wouldn't touch it.
Yeah.
And our insurance companies have been pretty clear they're not going to touch it.
Right. It also seems unworkable because what the incentive would be for the healthcare network to bring people into the more expensively billed facility, unless they were incentivized by, and as Lahey has very properly done, bringing people who have a particular need for care to the facility that's best to provide them, because it's a whole different system.
Yeah, and you want, for a system to work the way it should, I mean, you want to be able, as Lahey does, to make a decision with a patient and with the patient's physician as to where to go. And you want to put them in the least expensive, high-quality setting you can. That's the best way for us to save money. And so the likelihood of partners breaking itself, or the insurance companies breaking it up into different components,
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
The limits on doctors, there are a provision with respect to limiting new doctors. I'm not going to go into details, but it's full of holes. The price limits that are on there simply guarantee that partners will continue to get higher prices than everyone else, which means their premium advantage will continue to grow. So we believe on process it's been flawed. We believe in substance it's flawed. And we're hoping the judge will, and the Attorney General, who I will say I admire and I worked for 4 years, and I agree with her on many things, but not this one. We hope that the more light gets shown on this agreement, the more light gets shown on the problems that will be created by it, the more likely it is that it will be changed, altered, or abandoned altogether.
Right. And what's interesting, because you brought that up, is that you did work for the Attorney General for 4 years, this Attorney General.
Yes.
And in many issues that we work on in Beacon Hill, it's not a matter of politics. It's not a matter
Yes,
of
absolutely.
what team you play on or what have you. It's a matter of doing the right thing. And in your opinion, in this particular issue, you've taken the lead role. And I know you've spoken with the Attorney General and advised her as to the reasons why this situation is unworkable. One of the scenarios that would concern me, and I'd like to you to comment on this, would be that if Partners acquires a facility and those prices increase, it would seem to me that physicians would go to the facility that could pay them more money. Once that happens, it would seem to me that because patients would want to follow their physician, that it would create another competitive disadvantage, leaving other facilities, leaving other community hospitals behind, and eventually, not Lahey, but other facilities, they may have trouble surviving. And some of these facilities that I would imagine would be those that care for the most economically challenged patients in the Commonwealth.
It's absolutely a scenario we fear. Several things are happening. You have to remember that hospitalization itself is dropping. In other words, we're finding new and better ways to keep people out of hospitals. So the hospitals themselves have to adjust. And so what you see at this point is a need by Partners, which has a lot of very high-priced beds to fill, its need to get bigger. One way you get bigger is you acquire the physicians who, for the most part, direct you and I, because we listen to our physicians, to where we go. Partners' war chest, I'll call it that, forgive me, that's been grown over the last 20 years by that premium advantage. Their contracts that are much richer than the rest of ours allows them to acquire physicians because the revenue stream from that physician, because they have the higher priced contracts, will support higher compensation. So you can take physician A who works for Lahey or BI or Tufts or Hallmark or Lawrence General, and you can switch them over to Partners Employment. Right. They'll be in the same office, same equipment, same patients, and being paid 20% more. And that enables them to gather a patient stream from those patients. So as they continue to get bigger, as they continue to get stronger, as they continue to have a premium advantage over everyone else, it allows them to pull more physicians in, pull more patients, and that begins to impact hospitals whose, continue to be disadvantaged. And the Attorney General herself, in her cost driver reports, identified that as a huge problem because the hospitals that are disadvantaged, that are usually, the major employer in their community, right, that are there in emergencies, that are most accessible, that are high quality, simply because of the Partners' impact and taking that $1.20 of the dollar and leaving the others with 80 cents, they end up not being able to compete for physicians, to rebuild facilities, to create nice atriums, and ultimately they will be disadvantaged. And my concern and others' concern is we'll go out of business. Now, Lahey's not going out of business, but there are smaller community hospitals that their communities rely upon that very well may. And again, it's so we're all paying for the cost of those high-priced facilities, and many of us are going to bear the burden, a further burden, simply because the ability of our local hospitals, our community hospitals, to be able to survive in a marketplace where those dollars are going into Partners will become less and less. Lahey's model is absolutely the opposite. We're not seeking to fill, our beds are full. What we're trying to do is to push patients back into community hospitals, to reserve Lahey for the most complex, the most critical patients, build our community hospitals, which we've done with Beverly and with Addison Gilbert, which we expect to do with Winchester and with others. So that's really the difference in the philosophy. We are not this, what referred to in the healthcare industry as a giant sucking sound, right, of taking all the patients into Lahey. We can't. We're a small facility. We're 342 beds. Our goal is to have just the sickest patients with us and have the community hospitals caring for the patients that are appropriate for them. And that way we keep the community hospitals in business, we keep the tax base, the employment base, the accessibility in the community.
And from the point of view of cost to the patient, you're also keeping those down because they're only paying the costs that are necessary for their treatment and not costs that are inflated because of a monopoly in play.
Absolutely.
So in 2012, when we passed cost containment, in fact, the first Rapping with the Rep show
You're
we
right.
did was Lahey, we talked about how the incentive was to keep people healthy, and when they need treatment, to give them treatment in the most effective and efficient way possible that, as you say, would be in many instances to keep them in the community hospital that's equipped to treat those needs.
Yep.
And what concerns me is that the nation is watching, and the nation is watching us go through our cost containment, and this is not containing costs.
That's one of the frightening aspects of this agreement is Massachusetts, and we've known this for years now, and you knew it when you did the cost control law. We are the bellwether for the rest of the country. We have 95% of our population insured at this point. That's fantastic. I mean, we have really solved that problem. What we haven't solved is the cost problem. We've begun to work at it. We truly have begun to work at it. But we're at a position at this point now where this agreement can send us off in just the wrong direction just when we're beginning to make progress on the costs.
That's right. We could continue to talk about this, and I really appreciate the information. But before we leave, I want to talk a little bit about the expansion of the emergency room at Lahey. I know construction will begin soon. Talk about what effect, first of all, the situation now and why it's necessary, and then what changes we'll see in the coming months and time ahead.
So we're very excited about this. When the emergency room was originally built compared to what it is now, we are seeing 3 to 4 times as many patients in our ER as it was designed for. Any of residents of Burlington who've been fortunate or unfortunate enough to have to go there will recognize how crowded it is. So we have approval from the Public Health Council to construct a new ER that will be state-of-the-art. That will allow us to appropriately handle the volume of patients we have in a much better setting. We hope to break ground this fall to actually get some of the basic foundational work done before the winter hits, and then move forward with the full construction next year. I think it's going to be a facility that we and the citizens of Burlington and surrounding towns will be proud of. It will make visits like the one you had with the speaker something that we can be prouder of, and we're really looking forward to it and excited about it being completed. What
was the capacity intended to be when it was built, and what do you think it will be after this?
I think the original capacity was somewhere in the vicinity of 15 to 18,000, and we're seeing 3 times that many. The new capacity will be sufficient for that. But it is important to remember, to go back to the first topic we began with, building the new facility is absolutely essential, but the other way we still have to focus on our emergency room overcrowding issues is to get mental health services back into the community, to deal with the substance abuse issue. If we can get to the point where we actually see people in our emergency room who truly have to be there, that will solve a lot of the facility problems, but not ours. We're clearly too small. Burlington's a very different place than when Lahey first came here.
Right, we've got to work on both those fronts.
We've got to work on both,
and solve both problems at the same time. One's not exclusive of the other. Let's do
and
both.
we're looking forward to the continued support of the legislature.
And I'm glad we can do that. David Spackman, thank you very much for
Thank you
coming
very
on
much,
Rapping
Ben.
with the Rep. I appreciate it, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Rapping with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon.